Rara, in your view, who stands to gain most politically from this outcome?
The winner is the people, not the politicians. Now, the politicians are the greatest losers, all of them, because of many of them have become career politicians. And when you do the math, among them, it's 500 years of being politicians, never being able to do anything for the country. Now it is time for the politicians to start respecting the Constitution. So the winners are the people, the winner is the Constitution. And more importantly, the judiciary is now going to be respected because they have done something that will be recorded in history, that there was a great act of courage from the judiciary, the High Court and the Court of Appeal.
All right, Senior Counsel, the judgment was that President Uhuru Kenyatta has contravened Chapter 6 of the Constitution, but the President was no doubt advised. What does tonight's outcome say about the quality of legal advice in government?
I don't want to speculate on the quality of legal advice, but I think the President, right from the start, was not undertaking a legal process, but a political process. I think the President personally probably had no regard or had no time for the legal technicalities, to shepherd this process. He was more concerned about the political aspect of this process. And I think they made a lot of mistakes in terms of, how they did, how they started the process, how they initiated. It was a process that was very contemptuous of everybody other than the President and the Prime Minister. And that's why they made a lot of mistakes down the road. And that's why the courts were easy. They found it easy to poke holes and finally to destroy the process entirely.
Right. Well, one of the issues that did come about, Morara, was that there was no evidence to show that there was meaningful public participation in this process. What is the threshold of public participation? How do you measure it?
So the court is very clear. When you measure public participation, you look at case by case. There is no one measure. It has to be every case analyzed on its own merit. Okay, and now another key element that came through was the issue of the IEBC. And for those that argued that the IEBC didn't have a quorum and also was not properly constituted, what does this mean, Senior Counsel, for the by-elections that have passed and also for the upcoming general election next year?
I think the courts were right. They made a distinction between the composition of the IEBC and the quorum. And they make the dichotomy that those are two different issues. The composition is the number. The quorum is those who are present on the table at a given time. And I think the courts were right. But I think, what has passed is passed in terms of retrospective application of the ruling. But I think in terms of the future, I think there's a lot to be learned by the IEBC. Fortunately, now they will be full force in terms of, the right numbers, because I think the process has come to an end. Parliament has vetted the new commissioners. And I think IEBC will now be standing on its foot properly.
Right. Morara, does this hurt President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy, in your view?
Definitely, because as the court said, the role of the president is to respect and obey the Constitution, not to change it, not to amend it. In fact, in the Constitution is very clear when the president is required to do something in regard to the amendment of the Constitution. It's very well stated in the Constitution, but he is not required to change anything, and that is going to go as a dark part of his legacy for not upholding the Constitution and for trying to change it.
One of the issues that has come up, we've spoken to a number of Kenyans across the country, and many of them feel that really the government's priorities were not in place. There was too much focus on the Building Bridges initiative and not enough focus on the economy, building the economy, particularly during this time of the pandemic. Senior Counsel, what do you have to say about the fact that many people feel that the government does not have its priorities right?
I think that's correct. And I think this is a very good judgment for the president, because the president has taken upon himself to be devoted or to be obsessed, if I may use that word, with his succession and all that. And I think the court now has, completely taken that out of his diary. His diary is cleared, and I think the court now has given him an opportunity to work for the Kenyan people, to look at his, the last 10, 11 months of his legacy, to look at the economy, and even to do one or two things about the Big Four agenda. I think this ruling, in my view, is excellent for the president because, this running around with Raila, this running around with the BBI, this constitutional referendum, all those things will be now off the table. He will come back to his day job, which is to deliver for the people of Kenya, to finish the projects, that are halfway, and even to see whether he can do one or two in relation to the Big Four. So I think it is a blessing in disguise for him.
All right, and just another question to you. Is this the end of the BBI, or are you anticipating that anybody might take this appeal to the Supreme Court?
I mean, there's an option to go to the Supreme Court, but it's a waste of time, right from the start. I mean, this is a case that is difficult to defend from the High Court. I mean, it's also a very difficult case to argue in the Court of Appeal because the government the President and the Prime Minister did not follow certain basic steps of the law, and there is no way they could have won the case in the High Court. There is no way they could have won in the Court of Appeal. Of course, the dynamics in the Supreme Court is very different, but I think it is a very difficult case to win. It's a waste of time, and I think Raila did the right thing I think he said this very clearly, that he doesn't want to go to appeal. He wants to devote his time to his campaign. He wants to launch his presidential candidature. That is the right thing for him. For the president, I think it is time for him to give up this obsession he has with who will take over from him and try to score more points in terms of his legacy.
All right. Morara, as the governor of Kirinyaga tweeted, and Waiguru, it is time for introspection for politicians, isn't it?
Definitely. It is a time for introspection for them to stop being obsessed with creating positions. What they ought to do is to work for the people. And you earlier talked about the fact that the people are suffering. The economy is collapsing. The pandemic is ravaging the people across the nation. That is where the politicians should be. That's where the focus should be. The politicians should stop thinking about changing the constitution and start working for the people.
All right. And just finally, Senior Counsel, I asked the question about earlier to Morara, who really stands to gain the most politically from this? Is it Deputy President William Ruto?
I think he's one of the winners, but for me, I think as my colleague said rightly, the biggest winner is the judiciary, the courts. The courts have shown the politicians that they are new kids on the block. They cannot be ignored. They fight back and they bite hard. But I agree with you, in terms of, the main players, the Deputy President becomes the big winner, the President and the Prime Minister big losers, and many other politicians, people like Gideon Moy, people like Wetangula. There are many guys who now have to look at a very bleak future because they can't be president, they can't be deputy president, and there's no other positions like the prime minister, deputy prime minister for them. So there are many guys who will be jobless come 2022.
All right, thanks so much. It's certainly something that we will be keeping a close eye on. Senior Counsel AhmedNasir Abdullahi, thanks so much for joining us. And also Morara Omoke, an advocate, thank you as well. You were the 76th respondent in the BBI Court of Appeal case. Gentlemen, thanks for your time on NTV Weekend Edition.